Well, I suppose, yes.
It's a catharsis. And what about Keats, like romantic poets and that? They have obsessions with suicide and with the inability of someone to grasp life fully, like Keats in the Grecian Urn, and a moment frozen in time and not being able to go beyond that to fully be alive, and therefore there's no hope. I mean, he had tuberculosis and that, and people are sick and die, and it's reflected through art and poetry and that, and the poetry is obsessed with the inability of people to fully realise themselves. So is Keats a metalhead?
Yeah, well, I don't know. You see, I'm just trying to make sense of all this, because you've said a number of things here between you. You've said, on one hand, you've said it's an escape. On the other hand, you've said it's fantasy. And on the other hand, you've said it's fun. That's why I'm trying to work out...
Catharsis.
And catharsis. So what are you getting out of this? Perhaps you can explain.
There's a lot of aggression in the world. And it's there. It's right in front of your face. It's on TV. It's everywhere. You need to let it out. Just let it out. You'd look pretty stupid singing a love ballad to music that's going at 100 miles an hour. It's that easy. You just got to let it out.
I think you talked about 4 points there, where it's like it's escapism and it's also reflecting, you know, a world that's gone to hell in a handbasket, as Tony said. And I think it is both of those things at the same time. You know, for some people, for different people, it's different things at different times, obviously. And I don't think there's much difference really between the kind of heavy metal renaissance that's happening now and films that you see like Terminator 2, the Batman films, which are very gothic and very black and nihilistic. I don't think there's that much difference really. I think it does reflect the times, and also that sense that people have to be really extreme in their positions.
So in other words, we sort of move back to the Middle Ages with this fascination for Gothic horror.
It's very Gothic, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ronald Conway, you're one of the people who's concerned about this and the likely effect on kids who are exposed to many hours of this kind of music. What's your concern specifically?
Well, I've heard a lot of talk to the effect that this music reflects the violence and hellishness of our society, but is it in fact contributing to it? I've heard these arguments and rationalisations put up for why people take dope or why they get wiped out at weekends on grog. Have we ever stopped to think, you know, that some of these arguments were sort of looking at sound as a kind of narcotic? Now, early in my career, I did a lot of work in hypnosis with the use of sound. Now, the fact is that sound is not something you play around with. You know, it's a loaded pistol, it's a loose cannon. The French did experiments with infrasound, ultra-low frequency sound, and when you get too much of it, it bursts your guts and you drop dead. Maybe this is be the end of it all, as far as I can see.
But I understand there have been some specific experiments done, animal experiments essentially, exposing animals to long periods of aggressive sound. What was the result of that?
Well, it's mainly done at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin. It indicates that once you listen close up to music above 60 decibels, physiological changes start to occur. Arteries and capillaries start to narrow, blood pressure goes up, and you start getting jittery and twitchy. It's like the rationalisation for taking cigarettes. Everybody says, cigarettes relax me, but if you wire a person up, you find that cigarettes don't relax you. They make you jumpier than ever. And this could be said as an analogy to some of the music. I'm going to get my head kicked in for this, but I'm going to come straight out and say this is not music. This is noise. There is no recognisable beat. There is no melodic line. It's a gimmick. It's a vast gimmick. And I
suppose we could argue all night about the quality of the music. I'm really interested in what effect it may or may not be having on people who listen to it for extended periods.
It's good fun for some people. I'm not knocking it entirely. All I'm saying is that it's not as harmless as it's made out to be.
Dennis Twilight, you've been trying to say something here.
When rock and roll music first started in the mid to late 50s, everyone took the lyrics of that and said, here it is, it's the end of civilization as we know it. And a good 40 years later, we all love Elvis and Jerry Lee and all that. And I think it's the same with this sort of music. It's just, to the people who don't understand it and who can't possibly relate to it, it must seem like, yes, the world is coming to an end. But I put it to you, in 20 or 30 years' time, there'll be another Peter Couchman out there, and they'll be talking about the new ultra-speed metal, and they'll be saying, why isn't it like that good speed metal of back in the early 1990s?
Does it have an effect or doesn't it? Am I talking rubbish or aren't I?
Well, Michael Schwartz, you're working with disturbed kids, aren't you? And you see a very definite effect of this music on some of them. Tell us about what you see.
I suppose we've covered a range of things that metal music provides for kids, and I certainly see metal music as being cathartic and enjoyable and fun and part of a peer group. But I suppose the kids that I see that I worry about are kids who become fixated upon metal music, and I don't see it as necessarily causing them to become distressed or suicidal, but part of their more general worldview, and they're experiencing feelings of hopelessness and alienation, perhaps because they're unemployed or not working up to standard in the educational system, or coming from families where there's been significant conflict and abuse. And for those kids it becomes perhaps a focus which validates their worldview. It doesn't construct their worldview, but it validates their worldview. And it gives them a sense of the hopelessness of their situation. And it can be quite comforting in those circumstances.
But you've seen kids who've listened to this music for hours on end and have then inflicted all kinds of injuries on themselves. This seems to be part of it. Tell us about that. That's what I was interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. The kids that I see who use this music for self-mutilatory sorts of reasons find it, once again, it's a comforting experience. This is something that they can relate to, that helps them to understand why they are like they are in the world. And the music gives them a sense of a relief. Doing something to their body gives them a sense of a relief. But getting back to the point that you were making about the kids in America who, I guess, were involved in this very issue, and that is whether metal music causes depression and suicide. And we look at these kids' histories, either the boys in Reno or the boy in California, and we find that these kids suffered from significant problems right along the way. They were heavily into drug usage, they were unemployed, they'd failed at school, they came from backgrounds of enormous violence and abuse. And it's only part of a much larger picture.
All right, well, perhaps we should look more specifically at that case in Reno. Because I think it is very enlightening on some of the points that we'll discuss here. And I really do want to get your reactions on this broad point, because I think it's central to the whole thing. Now, this was a case that involved two boys in Reno. One of them was a boy called Ray Belknap. He was 18 years old. And he died instantly when he pulled the trigger that night. His friend, James Vance, followed him using the same rifle, but he didn't die. Tragically, he survived with the most horrific facial injuries. Now, of course, what's central to this case is what those two boys were doing that day. They'd locked themselves away in a room and had listened for hours to music by Judas Priest. But one song in particular, Beyond the Realms of Death. Now, both James Vance and the parents of both the boys claimed that that music had directly led them to the suicide pact. Now, this is what James Vance and his mother in particular had to say about how Judas Priest music affected him.
Judas Priest was his favorite band. He went out and bought studs to mimic Rob Halford. He went to their concert, came home highly excited that he even saw him in person. I didn't like it. It made me uneasy, it made me uncomfortable. His behavior would change.
It was kind of crazy, I would say, looking back at it now.
And we would constantly fight. He said, did you understand what he said? He said, looking back now, the music would almost drive you crazy.
It drives you crazy.
It's a tragic result, isn't it? But in fact, James Vance had a lot more to say than that. He wrote a letter to Ray Belknap's mother in which he spelled out more specifically the reasons for their suicide. And that letter was later produced by her in the court case that was led against Judas Priest.
Is that the letter and photograph you received from James Vance?
Yes.
And what caused you to have an opinion about why your son committed suicide?
This is what James said made him do it. I had to believe him. He was still here to talk to me.
Would you tell me what it says?
It says, I believe that alcohol and heavy metal music, such as Judas Priest, led us or even mesmerized us into believing the answer to life was death.
Why do you think Raymond committed suicide that day?
I think he was affected by the music he was listening to.
I come to visit this place every so often. And I talk to Ray like a dead person. I don't expect an answer. But I do tell him what's on my heart, still. I would like to call certain people murderers. I feel that they murdered Ray. Well,